On our honeymoon, my husband took me to a luxury island resort, but at dinner, he raised his glass and said, "Cheers to the fool who paid for her own betrayal." I smiled, took out the receipts, and said, "And cheers to you, the man who just lost everything." Hours later, he was begging me to stay as security escorted him out. I never thought I'd get married again. After my first divorce at 29, I told myself I was done playing the emotional lottery. You invest everything, your heart, your time, your trust, and if it fails, you're left bleeding alone. But somehow, 5 years later, I was walking down the aisle again, marrying a man I thought was the exact opposite of my ex. His name was Brian. And if you ever met him, you'd probably get why I fell for him. He was the kind of guy who made an impression without even trying. Confident, not cocky. Well-spoken but not pretentious. He had this quiet kind of charm, the kind that made you feel like the rest of the world was noise and he was tuned directly into your frequency. I met him at an art gallery in San Francisco. I was there for moral support for a friend who was showing her work, and he said he was looking to buy a piece for his apartment in Nob Hill. He didn't ask for my number. He asked if I'd meet him the following weekend at the same gallery. Same place, different exhibit. If you're there, I'll take it as fate. I laughed, but I showed up. And so did he. That's how it started. He worked in tech consulting, or at least that's what he told me. Something to do with mergers and acquisitions. He could explain it perfectly and still make it sound boring, which only made him seem more legitimate. He had the car, the clothes, the air of someone who had worked hard and earned everything. It moved fast. Within 6 months, we were living together. I was running my PR firm from home, and he seemed to be constantly in and out of Zoom calls or flying to Seattle or Austin for client strategy meetings. I never thought to question any of it. He was attentive, generous, thoughtful. If I mentioned something I liked, an artist, a cafe, a certain wine, it would show up the next day. We were good. Or at least I thought we were. Then came the proposal. It wasn't extravagant, which surprised me. Brian wasn't flashy, but he had a taste for the finer things. Instead, he proposed during a walk near Crissy Field, with the sun setting behind the Golden Gate. Simple. Quiet. Intimate. He said he didn't want a prenup. Said, "We're a team now. I don't want to enter marriage planning for it to fail." And I bought it. I bought the fairy tale. I told myself this time was different. The wedding was small but beautiful, just close friends and my younger brother Leo, who flew in from Boston. My parents passed away when I was in my late 20s, so it was mostly my circle. Brian's family was notably absent. He said his mom was sick and didn't travel. I didn't push. Some people carry their childhoods like broken glass, they try not to talk about it too much so they don't start bleeding again. But that should have been a red flag. There were a few, if I'm being honest. But love is the best filter for overlooking the obvious. I paid for the majority of the wedding. Not because Brian didn't have money, at least, I thought he did, but because I wanted the wedding I dreamed of. He offered to cover the honeymoon. "Leave it to me," he said. "It's the one thing I want to plan entirely on my own." That's how we ended up in Bora Bora. We flew first class, landed at one of those ultra-private island resorts where your room is basically floating on top of clear turquoise water. Every night they brought you fresh seafood and hand-picked fruit like it was the Garden of Eden. It was so surreal. I remember thinking, this is what happiness must feel like. But Brian was off. He wasn't the man I married, not exactly. He kept stepping out to take calls. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and he'd be out on the deck, staring at his laptop, headphones in. I chalked it up to work, to stress. He said there was a deal about to close. I believed him. I noticed him texting a lot. Mostly when he thought I wasn't looking. The screen was always tilted away. The first time I caught a glimpse, I saw a name, Alara. He said she was a colleague. I told myself not to make a scene. Not on our honeymoon. The real tipping point came on day 3. I had a spa appointment. Brian said he was going to catch up on work emails. When I came back, I found his laptop open. And I don't know what came over me, but I looked. I didn't want to. But I did. There were folders. Password protected ones, but also ones labeled oddly. H. Smith_docs. Holdco assets. And one named simply, after. I clicked. I wish I hadn't. Inside were screenshots of my financial statements. Emails between him and Alara, talking about timelines and clearing out funds. One email said, she doesn't suspect a thing. Once I initiate the withdrawal, she won't see it coming. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. My heart started racing. My legs were numb. It wasn't just cheating. It was theft. It was betrayal, in slow motion, premeditated like a bank heist. He had planned this. From the beginning. I took pictures of everything. Grabbed the small USB drive I always carried in my bag for presentations. Plugged it in. Downloaded every file I could find. And when I was done, I quietly closed everything, put the laptop back exactly as I found it, and acted like nothing happened. The next few days, I was the perfect wife. I played my part. Smiled. Kissed him. Let him think the mask hadn't slipped. Because I needed to make sure he wouldn't suspect I knew. Because I needed him to feel safe, until he wasn't. The night of our final dinner, he arranged a surprise. A candlelit meal on the dock, complete with champagne and a private server. There was even a violinist. And as we clinked glasses and I looked into his eyes, pretending not to know what he really was, he leaned in and whispered, "Cheers to the fool who paid for her own betrayal." He smiled like he had won. I smiled back, pulled out the envelope I had tucked into my purse, and set it gently in front of him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Cheers to you," I said softly. "The man who just lost everything." He opened the envelope and froze. Inside were printed copies of the emails, the bank transfer screenshots, and a signed document from my attorney. He didn't speak for a full minute. His face turned from pink to ash. Then his voice, low, hoarse. "You don't understand, but I did. And I didn't care." I stood up. "Security knows everything. They're waiting for my signal." At that moment, 2 men in resort uniforms appeared behind him. And for the first time since I met him, Brian looked afraid. He tried to say something, but I turned to the server, handed him my glass, and said, "Can you have that box to go?" Then I walked away. As I walked back to our overwater bungalow, I could still hear him shouting behind me. "Please, just let me explain. This is all a misunderstanding." But even then, his voice wasn't filled with guilt. It was panic. Not panic over losing me, but panic over losing control. Over getting caught. I didn't look back. The resort staff, bless them, didn't ask questions. The manager had already been briefed, he'd seen the documents, the emails, the forged paperwork using my business name and tax ID. They moved quickly, efficiently. I didn't need drama. I didn't need a scene. I just needed to get out of there with my dignity intact and my plan in motion. Back in the bungalow, I opened the safe and pulled out the rest of my documents. My passport. My backup flash drive. The folder of evidence I had compiled quietly over the past 3 days. I checked everything twice. My hands were steady now. Numb, maybe. But steady. An hour later, the knock came at the door. It was Leo. No, just kidding. But God, I wished it was Leo. Instead, it was the resort manager, a soft-spoken man named Adrian, who asked politely if I needed help with my bags. "Your husband," he said carefully, "has been escorted to a different property on the island. As per your request." I thanked him. Slipped him an envelope of tip money. He nodded like he understood more than he said. That night, I sat alone on the deck outside, looking out over the black water. The stars were obscene, so many of them it almost made you dizzy. I poured myself a drink. I took a deep breath. And I cried. Not because I still loved Brian. Not even because I was humiliated. But because betrayal like that, it hits something primal in you. Like discovering the house you thought you built was actually made of mirrors, and it all just shattered at once. I cried for all the years I spent rebuilding my life after my first marriage. For how I let myself believe again. For the woman who once thought she'd never be the type to be fooled. And maybe, a little, I cried out of relief. Because now I knew. No more wondering. No more doubting myself. I knew who he was. The next morning, I boarded a small seaplane back to the mainland. Alone. The resort staff arranged everything without question. First-class flight home. Driver waiting at the terminal. And when I arrived back at my apartment in San Francisco, my lawyer was already on a call. Fiona didn't waste time. She was an old friend of mine from Berkeley, sharp, methodical, and the type of person who genuinely enjoys reading legal fine print like it's bedtime fiction. I had sent her the entire file while still on the island. She had already drafted the initial legal response. Brian had left a few financial footprints. Not many, but enough. The account he tried to funnel money into had been frozen. A preliminary restraining order was already in place. And the best part? He hadn't covered his tracks nearly as well as he thought. He used his real name. Left his real digital signature on fake documents. Forwarded messages using his business email, thinking I'd never access them. It was almost amateur. Sloppy, even. A week later, he emailed me. Subject line, please. Can we talk? I didn't reply. 2 days after that, I got a voicemail. 3 minutes of him crying. Swearing it wasn't what I thought. That Alara was a mistake. That he got carried away, that he was broken, that he didn't mean to hurt me. The thing is, none of it was surprising. Manipulators always return to the scene of the crime when the fire dies down. They circle back to reframe it. To cast themselves as victims of a misunderstanding, or of their own pain. But it doesn't matter what drove a man like Brian. What mattered was what he did. What he chose. And I had already chosen, too. Fiona filed for divorce the following Monday. Emergency order. Cited financial fraud, emotional abuse, and breach of fiduciary trust. I had built a strong enough case that the judge granted a freeze on all of his known assets until the investigation played out. He tried to countersue. That went nowhere. He tried to call Leo. Bad idea. My brother answered, let him rant for 10 seconds, and then said, try this again and I'll fly back to California just to punch you in the throat, before hanging up. Leo's not subtle. But I love him for that. Over the next few weeks, things unraveled. For Brian. Not me. Me? I was rebuilding. Quietly, but with clarity this time. I removed him from every shared account. Told my assistant to lock down all business passwords. Changed the locks at home, even though he never had a key. He always said he preferred hotels when he stayed in the city. Turned out that was true. I found multiple Airbnb receipts on his corporate card. None of them for meetings. One was for a place in the marina. Booked for a week. Just 3 days before our wedding. Alara had been with him the whole time. They had a plan. And for a while, it worked. Until it didn't. What made it worse, what made it real, was not just the betrayal. It was realizing how much of me he had learned just to use against me. My routines. My habits. My values. He knew I paid my bills on time. That I trusted too easily. That I didn't like asking for help. That I'd rather handle things quietly than cause drama. He didn't fall in love with me. He studied me. And I was his final exam. What he didn't know, though, was that I had changed. That the first divorce taught me not to ignore my gut. That losing my parents so young taught me how to fight. That I kept every receipt. Every message. Every whisper of a lie. When the official documents were served, Brian went quiet. For almost 3 weeks, I didn't hear a word. No emails. No texts. No calls. Not even a vague thinking of you message, which part of me expected, because people like him? They don't let go unless they think it benefits them somehow. But silence? That meant something else. It meant planning. Strategizing. Waiting to strike back. I didn't flinch. I focused on my business, on my friends, on regaining some sense of normalcy. The kind of routine that makes you feel grounded again: daily coffee at St. Frank's, weekly Pilates at the studio in Cow Hollow, walking to the Ferry Building Farmers Market every Saturday like clockwork. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was standing on shifting sand. But even as I got back into rhythm, I had to be 10 steps ahead. Brian was still out there. And while I'd cut off his access to everything I could, there were still shadows I couldn't see. The kind of financial crevices only forensic accountants could shine a light into. Fiona had hired one, Alonzo, this sharp, no-nonsense guy from LA who wore cufflinks to Zoom meetings and didn't speak unless he had receipts. Alonzo was the one who found the other women. At first, it was one. A woman in Toronto named Mireille. She'd been engaged to Brian 2 years before he met me. The relationship ended abruptly, with her footing most of the bills for their condo and the startup he said he was building. Then came Elena in Chicago, a business consultant who lost almost $80,000 to a shared investment account that mysteriously got closed days after he disappeared. They thought they were isolated cases. One-offs. Embarrassing mistakes. But when Alonzo presented the full pattern, it was too specific to be coincidence. Brian was a serial operator. A con artist. He wasn't running from woman to woman looking for love. He was building a portfolio, dating like a corporate strategy. Target. Seduce. Exploit. Exit. Repeat. I remember sitting in Fiona's office, staring at the folder in front of me with the women's names, photos, timelines, bank records. She asked gently if I was okay. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at one of the photos. It was a selfie, Brian and Mireille in front of Niagara Falls. He was wearing the same jacket he wore the night he proposed to me. I finally looked up and said, he didn't just lie. He recycled the script. Fiona nodded. He's a professional. And in that moment, something clicked. I wasn't just a scorned wife. I wasn't a victim of heartbreak. I was one more mark on a long list, and now I had the power to help end it. So I contacted Mireille. Then Elena. Then 2 others Alonzo tracked down through online traces and financial breadcrumbs. I didn't reach out as the woman who brought him down. I reached out as the woman who understood what they went through. And they responded. One cried. One cursed. One thanked me. But they all agreed to help. Together, with Fiona's legal connections, we prepared a multi-victim civil suit. It wasn't just about getting our money back, it was about creating a paper trail loud enough that Brian couldn't escape it. We submitted everything to the DA's office. The wire fraud. The forged documentation. The digital manipulation. All of it. And then, like clockwork, Brian reappeared. He called from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Left a voicemail, I know what you're trying to do. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. You'll ruin both of us. I saved it. Sent it to Fiona. Then he sent flowers. To my office. The card said, we could still fix this. Classic move, guilt plus nostalgia, wrapped in desperation. I had them tossed in the trash. Didn't even open the plastic. By the end of that month, a formal investigation was opened. The case got traction quickly. Apparently, one of the financial institutions involved had already flagged suspicious activity in a report. They were just waiting for something to connect the dots. Now there was a fire. And I had the match. Brian tried to leave the country in early March. Tried to board a private plane from Palm Springs to Panama, where he had a second identity tied to a fake consulting company. He didn't make it. He was picked up on the tarmac. That night, I poured a glass of wine. Sat on the same couch where he once told me I was the safest person he'd ever known. And I thought about all the versions of me he must have seen during our time together. The trusting version. The romantic version. The one who looked at him and saw home. And then, finally, the version he didn't plan for. The one who fought back. The news didn't break immediately, but when it did, it spread fast through certain circles. The kind of quiet gossip that moves under the surface: old colleagues, mutual acquaintances, the gallery friends where we first met. I got a message from the gallery owner. All it said was, "Wish we'd seen it." Glad you did. I didn't reply. I just stared at it for a long time. There was something validating about people finally seeing the truth. But there was also grief. Not for him, but for the part of myself that had once believed so hard in the fantasy. The storybook love. The poetic second chance. It was all a script. But now I had the pen. After Brian's arrest, things moved fast. The case against him had teeth, more than I even realized. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted financial exploitation across state and international borders. He wasn't just a con-man anymore. He was a federal case. And the best part? It wasn't just me pressing charges. By then, we had gathered 7 women. 7 different women from 5 different cities who had stories that were eerily similar, like reruns of the same cruel episode with slight rewrites. Brian had underestimated all of us. He thought we'd be too embarrassed. Too isolated. Too afraid to come forward. But instead of breaking us, he united us. Fiona and Alonzo worked like a dream team. We built an airtight civil case, and with the mounting evidence we gave the feds, the criminal investigation took a life of its own. I didn't even have to testify in the early hearings. He pled guilty to avoid a public trial. He looked so different in court. Gone was the custom-fitted suit, the smug half-smile, the cool, curated confidence. In its place was a man in a wrinkled jumpsuit, pale and jittery. He couldn't even make eye contact with me. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read the charges. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Attempted grand larceny. Multiple counts. He'd taken a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but it still meant years behind bars and financial restitution to each of us. It wasn't just jail time, it was being legally banned from conducting financial consulting or holding executive positions in any registered business entity ever again. That was the part one requested. Fiona made sure of it. He could serve time. But I wanted his game dismantled. Stripped of his tools. And it worked. The settlement also gave me control over assets he'd tried to hide, 2 shell companies under false names, a crypto wallet registered in Singapore, and a fake consulting site he used to target his marks. We seized them all. Liquidated everything. What did I do with the money? I started a nonprofit. It's called the Safeguard Foundation. It provides resources for victims of financial abuse and romantic fraud, especially women over 30 who are disproportionately targeted by men like Brian. We run workshops, give out legal aid grants, and even offer cybersecurity advice for women entering new relationships. Miri sits on the board. So does Elena. So do I. None of us were victims anymore. And as for Brian? He wrote me one final letter from prison. 3 pages of carefully chosen words, apologies that sounded like script reads, philosophical musings about his upbringing, a desperate plea for redemption. I didn't reply. I scanned it. Uploaded it into a locked folder in my system called, just in case I ever miss him. Because I won't. But it's good to remember who people really are, especially when they wear masks so well. I moved out of my old apartment, finally. Too many ghosts in the walls. I bought a place across the bay, near to Barone. Something smaller, with huge windows and enough light to make shadows irrelevant. Leo visits all the time. He calls it the fortress. We laugh now. He told me once, you took down a white-collar predator with nothing but Wi-Fi and rage. You're like the modern-day Robin Hood, if Robin had also color-coded her receipts. He's not wrong. I don't date much these days, but I'm not closed off either. I just see people a lot clearer now. I don't rush. I don't explain away red flags. I don't make myself smaller to fit someone else's idea of what love should look like. And most importantly, I don't let my guard down for anyone who hasn't earned it. That last night in Bora Bora, the night it all crumbled, I remember looking out at the ocean and thinking my life was ruined. But it wasn't. It was just beginning again. Without him. Without lies. Without betrayal. Just me. And the peace that comes from knowing you faced the storm and didn't just survive, you turned the wreckage into something better. And Brian? He'll have plenty of time to think about what he lost. Because I didn't just walk away. I walked away with everything. And left him behind with nothing but the truth.